de una rosa te diera una espada, pues las flores inertes nunca dicen nada. Si en lugar de una bala te diera mi almohada, que te sirva de escudo en noches con celada, ¿no será que el amor es la tumba de un viejo corazón? Un hemisferio entre los dos va conspirando una razón, en la vergüenza del saber. ¿Lo ves? Tengo canciones al revés, te lo confieso y no lo crees, te lo dibujo y no lo ves. ¿Lo ves? Hay un segundo para amar, se nos acaba de escapar, se nos acaba de olvidar. Amar. Odiar. Callar. Te escribiré con palabras que no sé, te besaré con mis labios de papel y preguntaré por qué. Preguntaré por qué. Si en lugar del amor te hiciera una frazada que te cubra la muerte, la imagen, la espalda. Si en lugar de mi voz tuviera un argumento que te mienta al contarte todos mis lamentos, ¿no será que el dolor es el templo de un niño corazón? Hay un infierno entre los dos, se escucha el diablo en sol mayor, está silbando en el balcón. ¿Lo ves? No soy tan bueno como crees, tengo raíces en los pies, tengo cigarras en la sien. ¿Lo ves? La luna ya se despertó, me oyó cantar y se enojó, me vio callar y se alegró. ¿Lo ves? ¿Lo crees? ¿Me ves? ¿Me crees? ¿Y quién dijo que podías irte ya? te dijo que tenías que escuchar? ¿Quién te dijo que todo esto era verdad? ¿Quién te dijo que nada esto era verdad?
Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. The song you just listened to is by evolutionary biologist Pedro Marquez Zacarias from the Purépecha region of Mexico. He got his bachelor's at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México in Mexico City, his PhD from Georgia Tech, and is now a postdoc at the Santa Fe Institute. Pedro is interested in the origins and evolution of biological complexity and the history and philosophy of biology. He also plans to study the evolution of language, focusing on his mother tongue, Purépecha, which, as we will discuss in this episode, is somehow not connected to any of its surrounding Mesoamerican languages. Outside of research, Pedro is interested in science communication and had started a bilingual blog, Biomusings, that collects perspectives from different scientists. He is also interested in the inclusion of marginalized people in science. During his PhD, he taught at Freedom University, an underground college in Atlanta for undocumented students, and volunteered for Books Not Bombs and the Global Village Project, which support the education of refugees. And of course, he makes music too. You can find links to all of these in the episode description. In this first part, Pedro tells me about his early life in Purépecha, the ancient region, language, and culture that predates Mexico and was isolated from its surroundings. He describes how he moved to the city and lost some of that culture, and why he returned to it later with a renewed appreciation. He shares his early education, subsequent involvement and disenchantment with politics, and trajectory into researching biology. So, well, first of all, thanks a lot for doing, agreeing to be on this podcast. It was like pretty quick, like I contacted you and like pretty quickly you got back to me. I was like, yeah, I like what this guy is doing. It's like very exciting. Because...
Thanks for inviting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, it's because my interests are also kind of in the intersection of the world of physics and biology. And over time, I have moved... I don't think you need to like mute yourself in general. The recording is not going to be affected by that, I think, so that's fine. So, yeah, over time, I feel like I have moved slowly away from physics and more towards like biology and neuroscience. But it's very exciting for me to like think and talk about, particularly like take a step back and particularly think about some of the like the philosophical aspects that you and, your community seem to be interested in, which is think about, the boundary between physics and life, or matter and life. And I want to get to that. But before we get to that, let's start with, getting to know you a little bit. So, sort of like a brief life story, like, where were you born? Mm-hmm. What was your upbringing like? What were the circumstances of growing up? And then what kinds of stuff have you experienced and been involved in your sort of, personal and academic trajectory to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, I was born in a region in Mexico, in an indigenous region called the Meseta Purépecha. Mm-hmm. Purépecha is this indigenous culture that has existed for a while, longer than Mexico as a country. So just like in many other countries, there's these very strong indigenous roots. In Mexico, something that happened is that many of them, they still exist and they preserve their their culture and customs in some way or another. Even after the Spanish brought like the religion and everything, they still keep a lot of the cultural aspects. So my all my family's from there, and my parents, for random reasons, they had to move through the country. So that's how we kind of left this small town and started moving around Mexico.
I saw on
And
your
that's how-
website that the language is the language also called Purépecha?
Yeah.
You said that the language has no like evolutionary connection with the languages around. Oh, no. With no other known languages is what you said, which is very interesting because so that means people have not been able to connect it to any other language known in the world today.
Yeah.
So it's like grammar structure and everything is kind of different.
No, I mean, there's, according to language classifications, I mean, I'm not a linguist, but there are ways to classify languages according how they're structured, but that doesn't give you an evolutionary relationship, right? It's like there's these types of languages called agglutinative languages, and Purépecha is one of them, which means that you just agglutinate many small roots of things together to form a big word, and that means something. But within Mexico and like anywhere else, they haven't found a relationship with any other language. So in part is because of the history of this region. Before the Spanish came to Mexico, they were very isolated geographically and culturally because the dominant culture were the Mexica and the Aztecs in the central part of Mexico, who dominated other cultures around it, around the valley, the central valley of Mexico. But they couldn't dominate the Purépecha. So then there was always kind of a barrier between Purépecha and everything else. And not only that, but the geography was also very important. There's a lot of mountains around, and no other culture to the north was dominant, and to the south also. So they remained isolated for a long time. And actually, historically, we don't know where they came from, like how did they appear. We more or less know about the Mayans and the Aztecs and other big cultures because there's a lot of history, and they put things on their, I don't know, on their pyramids, and some of their kind of scriptures have this information. But in the case of the Purépecha, we don't know. And also there was a very important tradition in the Purépecha culture, which is that every year there was a particular day where they will burn everything they've produced during the year so that they could start anew. And that meant that there were not really old recordings or like anything old
That's
that
so
they produced.
interesting. That's like trippy. Like you could make a whole like TV show about. You could
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
put in a little bit of a magic realism or like paranormal aspect. But where did these people come from? Are they aliens?
Yeah. I'm sure we can make an alien show about this.
Yeah.
And not only that, there are some very interesting cultural aspects that they share with the Inca culture in South America. For instance, within all the cultures in Mexico, nobody knew how to use copper, but the Purépecha knew, and also the Inca knew, and some of the kind of the clothing style was also very similar to the Inca people. And there was also a very traditional song, very old song that nobody knows where it came from in Purépecha, and in the song talks about the 4 stars, and there's a constellation like the La Cruz del Sur is the southern crux, I think is the translation, that you can only see from the southern hemisphere. And other just similarities that like you could be very what's it called, if you let your imagination run wild, you could think that some precursor of the Inca culture might have traveled north and arrived also in that area in Michoacán. There's a river, so then if you arrive in that zone, once you start in the river, then you go up through the river, and then you start see the copper mines and like the development of the culture in the very early stages geographically. So that kind of makes sense. But and only kind of recently, some people have started doing studies not on the Purépecha but in other cultures, and they've proven that there was possible, and there was actually a lot of kind of traffic from the south of the continent to the north and to the west of the Pacific coastline, up to what's called this very group of islands in the Pacific, Polynesia and all of that, I think. So it has been proven that people were able to travel very long distances in the past, but the Purépecha is kind of a small region, and nobody has really studied how could these people from the south, how could they travel up there. But I mean, it's still open question. Like, nobody really knows where these people came from.
Could you tell me a couple of sentences in Purépecha?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what. There's a phrase that's very used in that region, and they also have their own flag. And then in the flag there's a symbol of strength, and when you say "or strength" of this people of this town, not town, this area, you say "Huchar Winapiqua," and Huchar also is like us. So when you, for instance, tell somebody you're my dear, if you have a lover, if you tell them my dear, you also use that Huchar, but you say Huchet. Minzita is heart, so they say you are my heart kind of thing.
I see. So it is like a living language that people actually speak in. Like, you grew up, your first language was Purépecha?
Well, I'll say my 0th language was Purépecha.
Your 0th language?
Because when we were just starting to speak, my siblings and I, it was just Purépecha, and it was just kind of in our minds in very early in our lives. But then we moved to the city, and then it became something kind of blurry, and now none of us really speaks this language. So I understand a lot of it, and also because I'm interested in music, and they have preserved the language also in music, so they play a lot of music in Purépecha, and obviously my parents and everyone else in my family, but except for my siblings and I, speak it. So in that sense, for instance, my brother, who's the eldest, he spoke Purépecha very well when he was very young, but then we moved back then to the largest city in the world, which was Mexico City, and then he started school, and obviously there was a huge pressure to just speak Spanish. And also, I mean, there's a lot of discrimination in Mexico against indigenous people even to this day. So back then it was even stronger, and I think my family felt, or my parents felt, the need for us to use primarily Spanish, and actually sometimes they would speak in Purépecha in front of us just to like to talk about I don't know, adult things. I don't know what they would talk about. So it was kind of later in our life, or in our lives, especially me, who from my siblings, who got interested in kind of relearning about the culture and specifically about the language. And then it was about middle school that I started going every summer to my grandparents' house and visiting a lot of family members, and just being there was by the end of the summer, I felt that I could speak and understand almost everything, because it's a very intuitive language. As I was explaining how you make these phrases of my dear or strength, there are many roots that you can use and combine to make up some phrase. Even if you don't know everything about the language, you can start building. And I think back then I was much better about that, or developing that intuition that I'm now. But yeah, but that's been kind of the story of my relationship with that language.
And you were saying that your family, like, you're kind of telling me about your life trajectory. So you like moved away from there and moved to the big city, and then
to Mexico City and to other cities, because my dad worked in the military. He was moving around a lot. So actually with my mom, they went from one extreme of the country, which is the around Cancun area, not in Cancun, but around that state, to the other extreme, which is Baja California, which is below California, to Chihuahua, which is below Texas, to obviously Mexico City, which was one of the first places they moved to, and other cities in between. So they happened to travel a lot, and well, not travel a lot, just move around. They actually were not. We were not. We didn't really take much vacation. It was not like traveling because of the sake of traveling. It was just because my dad was moved from one post to the next.
And then how did you eventually like come to studying what you are and working on what you are working on?
Well, it was well, that's a very, I guess, longer story, but the short version is that because my parents didn't really have education, so actually my dad went into the military because it was the only kind of stable job that he could find at the time, and my mom only studied up to, I think, middle school. Also because in this indigenous region, women are not seen as like, they don't value education for women, and my mom was actually kind of an outlier going beyond elementary school. So she really fought her way to go through middle school, and I think because of that lack of structure, or my siblings and I weren't really kind of caged in a specific area. So for instance, my sister studied architecture, my brother studied history, and I studied what's called biomedical sciences. So
wow, and you have a PhD, right?
I'm finishing.
You're finishing a PhD
right now. I'm writing my thesis.
Wow, that's like such a huge leap from like between one generation and another. Dramatic.
It's very dramatic, and I don't know how this fits into the whole thing, but something that I've been kind of more aware recently is that when I was younger, I thought like going out and studying was like the holy grail of progress in my hometown. So I would tell all my cousins and relatives of my age, you should go and study, like that's gonna get you far, right? And now I think I'm not so sure about that anymore, in the sense that what they have there is something that you cannot replace by anything else, which is the culture and the people that you grow up with, and the community, and the very strong sense of community that you build being there, and just going out and studying and then getting interested in these very abstract things that sometimes have no relation with reality anymore, and getting your bachelor's, your PhD, all of that is kind of the opposite of building a sense of community. It's kind of isolating yourself so that you can study this particular thing in this very obscure field. So now when I go and visit my family, and some of my younger cousins or family members, like, oh, what are you doing there? like how is it living, I don't know, in Mexico City or in the US or whatever. Like I tell them about my experience, but now I don't really try to force them to like go and study and like
I think that's
better yourself.
I mean, that's a real nugget of wisdom, because I feel like there's this very strong, maybe somewhat silent global culture that, I mean, I don't know how to describe it really, but it's like part of it is reflected in this thing that, you know, you're kind of like ashamed of the indigenous culture, and then everything that's kind of like, probably like, I could just call it like kind of like Western or whatever, Western science, Western whatever, everything like that is seen as like this glamorous. And as you keep climbing up in that world, everyone, even the indigenous people or like people in India, they see that as, oh, this is cool, like, you know.
Yeah.
But for example, as you were telling, and so this big global mental culture makes you very easily forget that you can have like a different value system where this is not the thing that's most valued. Because everything around you, whether explicitly or not explicitly, is constantly reinforcing this idea is, do you have like a lot of education as far as the Western parameters are concerned, and, you know, whatever, things like that. And so it's like this big contrast between, like, as you were telling me about the culture of Purépecha, I was like, this is actually so cool that there are so many unique and sort of like mysterious and very like unique things. But on the other hand, when you like come to the city, it's those kind of, it's like you're like, it makes you feel like kind of like ashamed for, so it's like, if you think about it, I mean, there are certain things that are like kind of flipped about this value system that we are trying to assimilate within us. I think it doesn't really value some of the things that, you know, some like more indigenous cultures, they would be more like quick to see that, oh yeah, it's like this community thing is kind of important. But yeah, for me, I think it took getting a little bit older before I started getting a little bit disenchanted with the big, the promotion machine of kind of Western media and Western everything. And some of the things that I would say I value from my own native culture, it's not very easy to put that in words or like prove it or like demonstrate it very easily. Or it's not something that you like show off to people, or, you know. So anyway, so you're going to give me like a brief description of your trajectory into like studying what you're studying.
Yeah, so then around, and I mean, I was, because I didn't have education. Oh, there's something funny about also education, which is that my birthday is in October, and the school year starts in August in Mexico. So, and back then, kindergarten was not mandatory. I think it's still not mandatory in Mexico, but back then it was not. So I didn't go to kindergarten. My siblings did, but I didn't. But anyways, when I was about to be aged to start elementary school, my mom took me to the school and tried to enroll me in the school in first grade, and they said, "Oh no, he's not yet the age," because I was just like this 2 months or whatever it needed to be actually the age. And they've changed the law now so that people in my situation would be able to enroll now, but back then I couldn't. So that was quite disappointing, because at that point I was very excited about school. Like, I would see my siblings doing homework, and maybe that was a torture for them, but to me it was like, oh cool, like you get to do these random things. And so I was very excited, but then because of that I couldn't enroll. So then my mom said like, "Oh, that's too disappointing, but no worries. Let's go and get you like a notebook and pencil or whatever." And then just kind of very randomly, she started over that year, because then we need to wait another year, right, for the next school cycle. She started teaching me kind of the letters of the alphabet or something like that. So something very basic, just to keep me, I guess, not as disappointed as I was. And then I randomly started picking up books and pretending to read or trying to read until one random day, like, things started to make sense.
Wow.
Like I could actually read words and they will make sense in my mind. But my parents didn't even notice, like, and I was just picking books and started to read everything that I could possibly read.
That's so strange. It's like some kind of phase transition happened in your head.
Exactly.
Some switch clicked on.
Which was crazy to me, yeah. And the other crazy thing is that we didn't really have like books for kids or like anything like that. Like our family is not really like, we're the kind of the first Western family in quotes from that time, so they didn't really brought us up like reading tales for kids or anything. Like, actually, my dad's library was quite interesting because he was in the military and he liked to read, and they will give him books about, I don't know, Alexander the Great, Aristotle, like Napoleon, and all the great war heroes. And I just started picking up these books and started to read. Many things didn't make sense, obviously. Like, there were so many words that I didn't even know what they meant then, maybe not even now. But the things that the words and the structure of the language started to make sense. So then one day we were like in a bus with my mom, and I started just reading the signs, like the driving signs, and like, you go to this way for that place. And I told my mom, "Hey, look, something." And she's like, "What?" So, and now then she realized that I knew how to read, so, which to me was crazy that she didn't know, because at that point I was already reading random things. So then when I got to finally enroll in first grade, I already know how to read, and I just started learning like how to write. But like, the things that they would put us to read, they were very boring to me, because I was reading other things that seemed more interesting, like how the wars and like the strategy of the military or whatever.
Wow.
Which like it was quite vivid sometimes reading some of these things, right? And so I think from that point I just got interested in anything from elementary school to middle school. Anything that would be of interest, I'll read a lot about it. So I think I just read as much as I could. As soon as I discovered I knew how to read. And in high school, I was also very interested in politics. So I would have been labeled as a nerd, but I was not like an isolated nerd. I actually had many friends, and I was at that point kind of popular in school, so I was very into politics, and I was like, yeah, comrades, we're gonna do this and that and things like that, So
it's
I
like
got
some kind of communism.
No, I'm just saying comrades
I
as
see.
a kind of a half a joke, half
I
not
see.
a joke, because it's kind of a loaded word in this country. But the word in Spanish, like camaradas or compañeros, is kind of very commonly used when you go for a rally or for something. So so I will go and, hey, let's do this and let's do that. So I was very interested into politics, and I mean, I was good at, I don't know, chemistry or physics or whatever else we had, but biology also. But I hadn't really developed a passion for the sciences. But I was very passionate about politics, and during the 3 years of high school, I kind of started to feel that being in politics was kind of was very. It was kind of a dangerous path in the sense that so many things were or seemed unethical to me. Like in order to get to an actually good position in politics, you needed to do so many kind of obscure deals with people, and there was a lot of money involved. And I mean, this is high school, but it just so happens that the high school that I went to is so important in that state of Mexico, in Michoacan, which is the state I'm from. Like the person who led the independence war in Mexico, he was a director of this high school, and the other person who also led the independence war in 1810, around these years, he also was a student there. So many big historical figures in the country studied there. So because it kept that historic load, the politics inside the high school, even though we were just high schoolers, was so important. Like almost every governor that wants to be a governor needs to go through this school in some way. And also there's been so many like important people in the world. Like there's a very important poet in Latin America, Pablo Neruda, and he visited also this high school. And so because of that, I started to learn, like, in order to get to these positions, right, to be governor or senator or whatever you wanted to be, it would have been very hard to have high ethical standards, right? Everyone has to do something shady to get there. So that was kind of my first, in a sense, professional disenchantment, because I didn't want that for me, or to do that as a career. And it just so happened that then I was also interested in chemistry. So then one professor invited me to the chemistry Olympiad. And I was like, okay, I'll go to the training. And I went to the training, but the professors never show up. They were always late, and I just got bored. And then I left the chemistry Olympiad, and another professor invited me to the biology Olympiad and said, well, I know you don't really like biology, but the first topics are chemistry, so maybe that could be of interest to you. So I went there, and yeah, it was chemistry, it was biochemistry, the first few chapters of these books. And what really got me interested in that was the professor. He was, and still to this day, very engaged with material, with students, with everything, with education in general. And I was like, wow, it's like this person has this real passion for biology, right? And he kind of just inspired me to keep studying biology. And in this competition, then I participated for 1 year, and in that year I won in the school, in the state, and then I won the national, then I went to the international. I didn't win the international, but it was just like one very intense year out of the high school that I developed a very strong interest and passion for biology. And in particularly, I was interested in biochemistry for a few years. Even the first couple years of college, I was also very interested in biochemistry. And the interesting thing is that then in that year of the competition, my least favorite topic of the biology Olympiad was ecology and evolution. And now, if I describe myself as a biologist, I say I'm an evolutionary biologist.
With biochemistry.
Yeah, probably, right? Yeah. So, but now I'm an evolutionary biologist, right? So, it just took me a while to get to this point within biology, but I just needed to get into the biology realm and then explore different topics. And like in college, I was more interested. The degree that I was in Mexico City, which was the national university there, it was biomedical sciences. So it was mostly kind of molecular biology, a lot of genetics, immunology, virology. I was very interested in virology also. And you have to do research almost full time every year in a different lab. So this was a very intensive program. It was research-based program, and I thought that I would do that for the rest of my career, like do kind of biomedical things, which would have been quite handy for these times of the pandemic. But then I just, in one of the labs that I was there, in one of the labs that I did research, I also didn't really like the environment. It was in a hospital, and then in the hospital there was like the big boss, and then there were like the sub bosses who were like medical doctors, and then below the medical doctors there were the PhDs and postdocs, and below the PhDs and postdocs there were the thesis undergrad students, and then below the thesis undergrad were people like me who I wasn't doing my thesis there, I was just doing a rotation, and it was just very hierarchical, and it was just a very strange environment for me. So I didn't really like it, and I got an internship at the University of Arizona, and I remember that I requested to do biomedical research during that internship, but they said, well, all the places for biomedicine are full and we don't have any more, so you'll do research in ecology. So I went to an ecology lab, and it was great. Like, I really liked the environment, like everyone just quite horizontal. Like you could talk to the PI or to anyone, and it'll be the same if you were an undergrad or high schooler versus postdoc, whatever.
Yeah.
And just coming back from that, when I was doing my research thesis in Mexico, then I decided to go into an ecology lab. So that was my last year of college. I did research in microbial ecology. And that's where I also knew about the work that my current advisor is doing. So then I contacted him, and then he invited me to do an internship in his lab, which he was just starting here at Georgia Tech. So then I came here. So while I was completing my undergrad thesis, then I came to Georgia Tech and did also research here, microbiology, evolution, and that was it. And so I finally found kind of my calling within science. So it took a long while, right? It's not that I've always been, you know, many biologists are like, oh, when I was a kid, I saw this ant or this insect or whatever, and then I knew I was going to be a biologist. No, for me, it took a while. And not only that, but within biology, I kind of explored, wondered many things before finally saying, okay, evolution is like the thing. So now I've been here almost, well, now 6 years. So I have to graduate this summer, and then in the winter I'll be going to the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'll be doing just theoretical work. So also within the PhD, I started doing mainly experiments my first couple of years, but then I've been doing mostly theory for the last 3 years or so, or more. So now I think I've changed again my gears from having done experiments for years during college and first couple of years of PhD and even during my internships to doing now just theory. And it wasn't anything planned. Like, I didn't plan to be like that. I've been just wandering across different topics, but it has come in handy because now I can talk to people who do theory in biology, and I can talk also to experimentalists because I've done the experiments. I know how a bacteria looks under the microscope, kind of thing. And I also know like kind of the frameworks that people use in theoretical biology, which is.
So I'll come to these sort of research questions in a little bit, but I guess to sort of do a little bit more justice in rounding out your bio, I guess I should mention that, you know, you're still like pretty interested in a lot of like extracurricular stuff. So you were a teacher at this thing called the Freedom University, which is where you guys teach undocumented people from Atlanta. So you were involved in that. This is the only stuff. This is only the stuff that I see from your website. You're probably maybe involved in other stuff as well. But another cool thing is like you've also done some of this like little documentary / interviews, talking to scientists in the field about different topics. Most of the topics that I saw are about thinking about what is life and questions about evolution. And I kind of enjoyed those interviews. So you're interested in science communication. You also have some songs on your website, and I wasn't sure, like, are those you? Did you? Oh, you're like pretty good with the guitar and singing and everything. Yeah, wow.
No, it's just a hobby.
Yeah, nice.
Thanks for hanging out with Pedro and me in the Room of Lives. In the second part, Pedro argues that biology cannot be reduced to physics, which sees causal chains, and instead has to develop its own theories based on causal cycles. And does our scientific reasoning of causal chains versus cycles map onto our religious cosmologies of a linear universe, such as the Christian universe, versus a cyclical universe, such as the Hindu universe?
En la guitarra escucho voces florecer, pero no encuentro acordes para embellecer. Tu risa estalla en este amanecer. Yo no tengo canción. En el oscuro inmenso de este anochecer, perdí el soneto inquieto que quiso nacer. Palabras buscan puentes hacia ti y tropiezan en mí, Revolotean las canciones en anillos de asteroides con tu prosa, y las palabras se hacen nada, pues tu vuelo es aleteo de mariposa. Entre mis labios tengo sed para besar, pero no encuentro forma de hacerte llegar los besos quietos de la tempestad, mis besos de canciones, cuentos y besos de azar, por si algún día tienes la necesidad